welcome to Write Now Workshop Podcast, where you can write a book and change the world. I'm your host, Kitty Bucholtz, and this is episode 191, When Your Life Depends on It, an interview with Brad Borkan, coming to you on Thursday, April 9th, 2020. It isn't very often that I interview someone who's written a book that I think probably I will never, ever be interested in reading this book. But I can't say that Arctic and Antarctic explorers and how they did their exploring is at all on my radar, except that once I started talking to the author of, and yes, it's the name of the episode as well, the name of the book is When Your Life Depends on It, by Brad Borkan. When I started talking to Brad, I was like, okay, wait, that sounds really interesting. And that sounds really interesting. And by the end of the interview, I was like, I have to go check out your book. This sounds way more interesting than I thought it was going to be. So there you go. There's another reason why now might be a good time to try the kind of book that you think, oh, I don't know that that's really for me, because who knows? It might be. Maybe the whole genre, maybe just that one book. But when Brad and I were talking about his book and the sorts of things that he was writing about these explorers and how they learned to survive in ways that I, in a way, sort of can't even imagine. Like, they didn't even have any way to contact the people at the base camp to let them know they had a problem, or they'd run out of food, or someone was sick, or like there was just nothing. It was either you're going to get to base camp and live or not, which sounds terrifying. Why would anyone want to be that kind of explorer? Listen to this interview. It is so interesting. Honestly, I was like, okay, that's super cool. So that's the one thing I wanted to tell you. This interview is going to be more interesting than you think if you think that you're not interested in Arctic and Antarctic explorers. And if you are interested, then I think you're really going to be interested. But also, I wanted to just kind of have some encouraging things to say to you, because an awful lot of people who are listening to this are probably listening to this somewhere in a shut-in sort of situation where you are staying at home, maybe only getting to go out to go to the grocery store, or I've heard an awful lot of people have been told that they can go out for 1 hour of exercise per day, which, yeah, sounds a little bit like prison. So what I'm hoping is that what's happening here where I live is also happening where you live. The sun came out about a week and a half ago, and the temperature is finally going up. It got up to 57 degrees today by lunchtime, I think, which means it'll probably be maybe 58 or 59 before the temperatures go down again. And I'm sorry, I don't know what that is in Celsius, but I would say it's got to be 12 or 15. Anyway, it was nice, and it's sunny, and it's just beautiful. And we took our bikes into the brand new bike shop that's just around the corner from our building. And we had all the spring things that needed to be done. Like, I needed a new gear shifter because mine was rusting, and I got a basket. Yay. So, I was just really excited because it's spring when your bike is ready to ride, right? Unless you're Swedish, in which case your bike is ready to ride all the time and you ride your bike all the time. But I don't know that I'll ever be quite that Swedish. So I think I'm just going to stick to spring, summer, and fall, not the winter. Anyway, I hope that you are finding some great reminder of spring, good weather, sunshine. Maybe your 1 hour of exercise can be bike riding. Maybe it's walking or running. I plan on going running tomorrow. I finally started exercising in my living room. My husband and I are going to take turns doing it because neither one of us really wants the other person to see us exercising and huffing and puffing. And yeah, anyway, it's just our thing. So I'm super excited about that, because then I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable eating all I want for Easter. We bought a ham already. I'm going to put it in the crock pot because I'm not very good at, cooking stuff. I haven't decided what we're going to have for side dishes, but I did move here with a Costco-sized bag of Marie Callender's corn muffin mix. I'm very, very excited to have Marie Callender's corn muffins for Easter dinner. And then we'll actually be at church helping to create the streaming service Easter morning. So that won't really be relaxing, but hopefully will be a blessing to other people. So that's what I'm doing. Oh, and I sat out on my balcony a couple of days ago. Actually, I'm recording this on Tuesday. I think it was just yesterday on Monday of this week. I sat on my balcony in my camp chair in the sun in my t-shirt and jeans, and I had my jacket nearby in case, I'm just imagining things and it's really not warm enough to be sitting here. But I sat outside for like a half an hour, 45 minutes reading, and I felt like the world was a wonderful place again. So just a few things that I hope, if you are trying to think of how you can not have cabin fever, like maybe thinking of delicious, wonderful things to cook for Easter or Easter weekend. I know some of you usually go away maybe to someone else's house or on a little mini vacation for Easter, and I'm sorry if you can't do that, but you can think about what other things you could do. And definitely, I hope it involves sunshine because it's supposed to rain on Easter here. But anyway, I just wanted to throw out some bits of encouragement. Hopefully it's hitting a good place with you. Also, a little shout out to my niece Ashley, because today is her birthday. Happy birthday, Ashley. I don't think that she probably listens to my podcast, but I'm going to tell her that I wished her a happy birthday on the podcast, so maybe she'll get this far. I hope that you enjoy the show. Seriously, totally interesting, and might even give you some ideas for how you're thinking about living your life right this second, and maybe how you are thinking about some things that are going on in your story. I don't know, but I think it could be good. Also, I mentioned in the interview that I listened to the sample of the audiobook, and it was really, really good. So I strongly urge you to look up the audiobook for When Your Life Depends on It, because I'm pretty much 100% sure I'm going to buy it, because I really like the sound of the way that the person was reading the book. Kind of sounded like a National Geographic, but without any video. So I don't know. I think it's going to be good. That's it. I'm going to stop talking. The sun is like increasing my battery charge inside my head so that I feel like I'm just like talk, just because I'm so happy because I have sunshine. I hope you have some too. I hope you have a fabulous day. Do something nice for yourself. Be kind to yourself, and try to get a little bit of writing done this weekend. I hope you have a great day. Here's the interview. Today's guest is Brad Borkan. Brad has a graduate degree in decision sciences from the University of Pennsylvania and has a fascination in how people and businesses can make better decisions. Brad is the author of When Your Life Depends on It and has presented at business and Antarctic conferences, appeared on cable TV in the U.S., and on internet talk radio programs. His talks focus on leadership, teamwork, and winning against the odds. He is based in London and is a fellow of the Royal Geographic Society. Welcome, Brad.
Hello, Kitty. Thank you for having me on your show.
This is so exciting. You and I met at the Mark Dawson Self-Publishing Live event a couple of weeks ago. Actually,
right. Yes.
we didn't meet in person though, did we?
No, we didn't. It's just from connecting on the website.
Yeah.
I saw you had that podcast series, so I reached out.
Yeah. I love that group. It's like my favorite group of people.
Yeah, it's lovely. Wonderful group. Yes.
Okay, so first of all, my listeners know that I am a neuroscience geek. I even love zombie shows because I like to say I love brains. So when I read you have a graduate degree in decision sciences, I was like, that is super cool. Just give us a quick idea. What is that?
So that's a good question. It's the study of not just how people make decisions, but how do businesses make decisions, and how to use, back when I was studying it, how to use computers to help businesses make better decisions. But it morphs very closely into personal decision making. And because to a great degree, businesses make decisions because the leaders are making certain decisions or have certain goals. And then it's interesting because I've taken it beyond that, and where my focus becomes more towards how do people deal with goals? How do you deal with adversity, risk, and danger? And how do you deal with what happens when you don't make your goals?
Right. Okay. The last two books that I've been reading, one just for pleasure and one for pleasure, but also I was interviewing the author, happened to be Romantic Suspense. And I was just telling offline, I didn't want to say, no, I think I did say it on the interview. I just didn't say what the name of the author or the book, that I was frustrated with this one author was creating decisions for her characters where people are shooting at them. They're for the moment safe. and they have 17 pages of sex. And I'm like, really? People are shooting at you. But in this newer book, younger author, I don't know if that makes any difference. And the way that she did it was when they think that they've got the bad guy and that there is no more shooter, then they have a date night. But then when somebody shoots at them again, they're like, okay, we didn't obviously catch the shooter. I'm like, okay, see, that makes much more sense to me. So I love the idea that decision science is sort of something that I should know more about as a fiction author as well.
Well, yes, absolutely. And it's fascinating how people make decisions. And I think this is why I'm gravitate towards the Antarctic explorers, is because they were making decisions in this wonderful isolation. They didn't have access to communication out to the outside world, and they really had to make decisions on their own. So it's really fascinating in that context. But it's fascinating. I'm as fascinated by that as I am in why do we buy the products we buy? Why do we, what ads work? What ads don't work? Why do people have the relationships they have? How do they meet? How do they build careers and things like that? So all those types of decisions are fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Now you got me thinking as you were talking about how all those things, the things that I've done in my own life, I'm like, oh yeah. Oh, but that kind of decision is different from that kind of decision. That's so interesting.
Yes. Yeah. But they're all sort of interconnected in how you deal with either seeing things like goals or adversity and what happens when you hit a goal, don't hit a goal. How do you celebrate goals? How do you deal with missing goals, and I think that's so tied up in Antarctica it was just the perfect platform for talking about decision making, to try to get some of that out, because you've got men in adverse situations dealing with nature and dealing with wanting to do science and wanting to do discovery and exploration. At the same time, you put them into this incredibly challenging situation, and that could easily descend into fistfights and murder and mayhem and sabotage. And yet at the same time, these 6 expeditions that I look at in the book, and my co-author and I look at in the book, has a lot to do with why didn't these expeditions do that? Why were these expeditions so successful in this environment? And hoping that people can draw from that lessons for modern life, whether you're building characters in fiction or whether you're dealing with your own the modern world and how we see it. It's all of this is wrapped up in the same thing.
Right. Okay. So let's back up just a little bit. Give us the brief, like, how did you get so interested in Antarctic explorers? Well, I guess Arctic and Antarctic explorers. Right. And then like bring us up to when you started researching your book. And then let's just see where the conversation goes, because it sounds so interesting.
Oh, well, thanks. Yeah. Hopefully it's an interesting story. My mother worked at the local public library a few days a week, and I grew up in New Jersey, so after school, I was 8 years old or something, and have to go wait at the library. And I was bored, senseless as any 8-year-old boy would be, wandering around the library going, well, what am I going to read? What am I going to read? It's like about past a couple hours till she's can take me home, and I go play basketball with my friends. So it's like until that time, I was like wandering around going like, oh, this is just the dullest thing on earth, until I picked up an Antarctic book about Shackleton and Scott and these explorers, and I was just absolutely fascinated by it from then on. And it was looking at why, I guess what fascinated me was I'm not a risk taker though I've traveled around the world, I've been to Antarctica and I've done all this. I wouldn't class myself as adventuresome or brave in the way these explorers were. And when you add, so here are people very different from me. That was quite interesting to me. And then the idea that they would actually go to a spot on Earth that is no different than any other spot within 100, 200 miles. I can certainly understand why someone wants to climb a mountain. That you can say, there's the top of the mountain, I'm going to go climb to the top of the mountain. But to say I'm going to go to some point that's covered with snow and it's going to look no different than any other point covered with snow for the next 200 miles, it's like, why? And then had they just waited, so they're going in 1903, earliest expeditions were around 1901, 1903. Airplanes were just being invented by the Wright brothers, and then the aviation. If they waited 10 or 20 years, they could have just flown there and saved themselves all this angst and life and death and challenge. And the whole thing was just like fascinating. And then you throw in the mix of, from a young age being interested in advertising and why do people do what they do, you throw the whole mix in, and that's what got me caught up in the whole Antarctic thing.
So on the one hand, in your personal life, you're just interested in these expeditions and you're reading it in your personal life, but then going to college and studying and starting work and stuff, in a way, you're looking at the same sorts of ways that the brain is working. Is that right?
Well, exactly. Yes, exactly. And so it's how to, not so much in the neuroscience of the brain, the chemistry of the brain, but more in just what do people do, more from the psychology point of view. Why do you do what you do? And that side. And then to bring us a bit forward towards the book was about 2012, I think Captain Scott died in 1912 in Antarctica on the way back from the South Pole. They were second to the South Pole. They'd been beaten by Amundsen, and they died on the way back. And so Captain Scott and his team were quite big heroes in the UK. And there was a conference that was being happening, 100-year anniversary of Scott's death, happening in Plymouth, England. And I decided to go to it. And I thought I'm sitting on a train going down to Plymouth thinking, this is just the dumbest thing I've ever done. It's like, who's going to be there? Like, what's there people? But I'd met the most wonderful, wonderful people. And the Antarctic community, I met descendants of the famous explorers. I met authors of books I'd read. I met historians, met professors, met just the most wonderful people. And they were very welcoming. And they're like, everyone's like had their little thing about why they were there. And they're saying like, why are you here? I'm like, I'm just interested. And they were buying me drinks. And they were like, it's just like, I became one of them. And I never thought I'd be part of the community other than almost like a tourist to that community. And what happened was, in fact, I probably didn't buy a drink. The typical in London, you in Britain, you'd buy drinks for people as you join a group. You buy. I probably never bought a drink for anyone the whole time because everyone's like so friendly. They're like, oh, come on, and I'm not a big drinker, but it's like just very welcoming. But over the time of going to Antarctic conferences and sitting through lectures and meeting these people, I realized no one's ever put the two together and said, well, people have written books about the biographies of the explorers. They've written fictionalized accounts of the expeditions. They've written about the expeditions. Our book is about one aspect of the expeditions, like the equipment or the food, or something about one small part of an expedition or the science of the expedition. But no one ever, I thought, I'm sitting here in the audience time after time, I'm thinking, no one's ever written about what is really at the heart of these, which is the life and death decisions. And that's the most exciting. Because for the most part, they came near death all the time and yet very rarely ever died. Wow. You're saying like this is literally, if you look across these expeditions, they literally are like each thing it's like a thriller story. Like you couldn't make this up if you were writing fiction. So it's like, so to say, well, actually, why not? If I proposed the idea to a couple authors to say, could we co-write the book? And they're like, yeah, it's an interesting idea, but I don't necessarily co-write things. I thought, well, I know some Antarctic history. I work full time. So how do I put this all together? And that's when I happened to be at an Antarctic conference and met my co-author, David Hirzel. And he had written a few books and I just proposed the idea and took a risk. I just said, I'll take a big risk. And
wow.
If he's interested.
Yeah. And so because we are a community of writers listening in, I have to ask, so the first question, once you guys decided that you were going to do it, like, how did you do co-writing? I assume that he was still in California, you were still in London?
Right, exactly. Yeah, hopefully this will be interesting to the listeners because the book was my idea. And at first it's like, I met David. What happened at the conference was, because conferences are fairly small, so they went around the room and they said, okay, everyone has like 5 minutes to stand up and talk about what they're interested in. So I was sitting near the front. I stood up and I said, I'm interested in decision making and why they went and all this stuff. But I'm like a nobody. I'm like, yeah, there are book collectors who, people have, spend more on a book than I spend on my cars. Like they're like literally like just, and people who are literally the grandchildren of Scott and Shackleton, and it's just amazing group of people. And And so they're going around the room and everyone's talking about what they're interested in. And they get back, David's sitting near the back of the room. I'd never met him before. And he goes, actually, I'm interested in what Brad's interested in. So at the first break, I went up to him and said, I want to write this book, and are you interested? And I said, I'll send you all my notes. I just don't know you. I don't know you from anybody, but I'm so keen to do this. And it was taking a risk. And I sent him all my notes and all my ideas, and I didn't hear from him for a month. I was like, David's pretty quiet, actually. And so, so I thought, oh, I can't believe I've just given away all my IP. But I thought, well, unless you take a risk, you got to trust people, and you got to assume. And David's like, hey, I was, now we're best friends, and now he's like, yeah, I was interested from day one, but he never told me that. So it was like, but about a month later, I thought, well, I won't chase him too much. I think, well, let's just see what happens. And a month later, he sends me a chapter that's 10 pages long, single space. It was just amazing amount of work that went into it. Almost none of that probably ended up in our book, but it was like just the thought process was like, I've been thinking about this ever since you ever proposed the idea to me. It's like, and he's just, but over time we developed a working pattern, and it was great. And we're working on our second book. So.
Wow. Okay. So do you do, you must probably do email back and forth.
We're very old fashioned in that respect, because we do email, we do Skype, and we write in Word, and we trade. But we configured the book on Excel, and I think so. This will be, I think, quite interesting to your audience as well. Which is my approach was we live in different countries. The first thing we could do, everyone's like, "Do you have a contract?" I'm like, "Why do you want a contract? We don't have anything to have a contract about." We could get international lawyers talking to each other for days on end, spending thousands of dollars and thousands of pounds, arguing over who has rights of what when we don't have anything.
Yeah. So
I just said, David, like, look, we just have to trust each other. We'll just write a memo of understanding. And we never even barely did that. We were like, yeah, let's just start writing. Let's just trade ideas. And we spent 3 months working on the table of contents. Literally, It was like the old fashioned story of Abe Lincoln or something that I think someone said, well, if you had 8 hours to cut down a tree, what would you do? And he said, I would spend my first 6 hours sharpening the saw.
Yeah.
Or whatever, whoever said that. I'm not sure who said that. But that concept was sitting there going like, Dave, let's work on the table of contents. And here we go back and forth. What's in, what's out there? So many great stories to choose from, so many expeditions, so many people. How do you create a thrilling book focused on life and death decisions? And I want to write about mountain climbing. I want to go broaden it out into life and death decisions on Everest, in South America, and so and he's like, no, let's stick to what we can do and our expertise and our focus. And he kept me on the straight and narrow. And we wrote the book, printed it, put it on Amazon, and maybe half a year later said, maybe we should have a contract. It's like, we probably do have a contract somewhere. It's like, we did sort of like turn our memo of understanding into a contract. Either, it's neither of us are in it for the money. We're in it to get the Antarctic stories out. And, and so I think it's good to take risks like that. And to trust people, and you may get burnt sometimes, but it's worked out well for David and I.
Yeah. Yeah. I know I have heard stories about people who took risks and got burned, but I have to say that I just have kind of a Pollyanna, Mary Sunshine personality where I love to hear the stories where we took a risk. Our focus was on the story rather than the business/money part. And it worked out. It just makes me happy that, there are far more good, trustworthy people in the world than the stories you hear about the ones that are less so.
Exactly. I mean, David went from being a complete stranger when I first met him to being someone that's a lifelong friend. And the same with our audiobook narrator, Dennis Kleinman. I set out when I went to do the audiobook. I'd been going to the London Book Fair. Have you been to the London Book Fair?
Well, I was supposed to go for the first time this year. Yeah.
Okay, great. It's a great event, and to listen to people speak like Mark Dawson and L.J. Ross and all the various authors speaking there. And this one person stood up and said, the difference between, based on studies, difference between successful authors less successful authors have audiobooks. So I'm writing notes, and this is back like in 2016, or Dave and I still writing still working on the manuscript, and I'm like, I gotta have an audiobook. And so once we wrote the book, I thought, wow, I've got a microphone. I can record my voice, read the book into a microphone. How difficult is that? And I read like less than 2 paragraphs and thought, this is really difficult. This is super difficult. Plus, what does an Antarctic explorer in the early 1900s sound like?
Right.
And if I can just show the cover of my book for a second, just to show the photograph on the cover, these men pulling a sledge across the Antarctic tundra, and doing that for hundreds and hundreds of miles, really, really challenging, difficult, where take tough, sturdy men with deep, husky voices. Well, that's not me. It's like I got to find someone who has this sort of voice, and it was that, and again taking a risk, and I listened to hundreds of voices, and then chose Dennis. And Dennis has turned into a lifelong friend, and again taking a risk, but saying, this guy has the voice, and everything else is secondary to if he shares the same passion as Dave and I do. And it really came down to feeling like the whole process of building a team of people who had the same passion. It had nothing to do with money. It had to do with how do we get these stories told. Yeah. And the editors that worked on the book, and the book designer, everybody who's engaged in the book has been, I felt like I'm building a team of people. And
as it turns out, your audiobook was up for a major award, right?
Yes, that's right. That was the most amazing thing. Dennis is like, he reads the whole book, and I'd encourage any of the authors listening to produce audiobooks, but I'd be very cautious about using your own voice to produce an audiobook, because yes, it's cheaper, but if you can find the right voice, it makes such a difference. And I mean, because again, our book is about people who are Norwegian explorers. There's Antarctic terms, there's Eskimo terms, there's Dennis researched how to say all these various words and things like that. It was So Dennis reads the whole book, and we're going through chapter by chapter. I'm listening to his replays, and we're correcting things. And at the end, he goes, I really understand your book now. I really get it. So let me record the beginning again and submit it for an award. And he submits it to the Voice Arts Awards. So Voice Arts is like Grammys or Oscars. Voice Arts is the it's the awards for TV commercial voiceovers, for movie trailer voiceovers, these are all many big name actors, not just voice actors, big name actors. And we end up in the finalists. And it's literally like the Grammys or the Oscars. We end up in Hollywood at an event with Sigourney Weaver is the host, and Van Jones, and all these celebrities. And we're in there in the history category, and we're up against 4 other books, one of which is up for a Pulitzer Prize. All were on the New York Times bestsellers list. We're self-published with maybe 26, at that point, I think we had about 26 Amazon reviews, maybe sold a couple thousand copies, up against every other book was in the New York Times bestseller list, published by a big name publisher, audiobook produced, in some cases, audiobooks produced by well-known actors.
Wow.
And we're up there for Dennis's voice narration on the audiobook. And we didn't win. In case I say we didn't win, but it was the most amazing red carpet. It was a red carpet gala event at Warner Brothers Studios in Hollywood.
Wow.
There was a lot of dumb luck in it, but there was a bit of, trusting as finding Dennis. It was his vision of what the audiobook would be like. We would go back and forth on, how do you do an audiobook that's all about danger and risk? And I'm like, Dennis, you've got to act this. You've got to I'm coming up to a crevasse, the guy falls into a crevasse, right? It's so he's hanging by this rope. So chapter 2, you've got this explorer. Literally, the story is, his companions, he's with 2 other companions. They're pulling sledges. They have 2 sledges, both being pulled by dogs. And the idea was, because there are lots of crevasses, and crevasses can be covered over with what's called a snow lid. So it can actually be covered by snow, and you can basically walk across the snow and fall into the crevasse. And what saves you from death, basically, if you're lucky, is the sledge doesn't fall in behind you. So using the British term sledge, which is what they pile all their supplies on, you fall in, but you're saved by your harness. So you're done down maybe 15 feet and your companions then pull you out. And then they had 2 sledges, and they thought, well, we'll be smart. We'll put the second sledge. The first sledge has the less important supplies. So the first team goes, and there are 3 of them. So one person with 2 people with the dogs sort of trying to figure out what's the safe route. And they see a snow lid, and they realize there's grass there, and sort of trying to wave to the other guy. And as they turn around to wave to the other guy, he's fallen through a snow lid into a crevasse with the sledge, with all the dogs, with all the valuable supplies, including the tent, most of their food. And so these 2 guys are left on the ice with almost not that much food. They have to do like a makeshift tent, and they continue on, but the dogs die, and they're able to kill the dogs, but they end up eating the dog livers, which are filled with vitamin A, and which are poisonous to humans. And so they're slowly, the 2 men are slowly dying just from the poisoning in their bodies, and they're and then one of the men dies. And so Mawson's on his own, and so this whole chapter, which is written in about 1.5 pages, 2 pages. He's on his own. He's trying to get back. He has of course, throughout that time, that no one had any communication back to base camp or anything like that. So he's on his own, and he falls through a crevasse, luckily only saved by the harness and the sledge not falling in after him. And it's like, how do you tell that story, on an audiobook? Yeah. And I can get all excited and talk about that when I'm talking about this.
Wow. Okay. Well, let me just say that I've never been interested in this kind of stuff at all, but I'm thinking, I just got an audio subscription for my birthday, which was a couple of days ago. Maybe I have to read or listen to this book.
Okay. Well, I hope so. Yeah. I hope so. But Dennis is like, you don't act it, because I obviously in the inflection of my voice, I'm going to get very excited about this story. And Dennis is like, your reader has to infer that from the audiobook. You don't write in bold and italics, danger, danger, oh, I fell in a crevasse. You write in standard fonts, and the reader interprets for themselves what that situation might have been like for Mawson falling into this crevasse, wondering how am I going to get myself out in this weakened state. And this is the beauty of what Dennis did, was to take this and turn it into something that's exciting at a very low-key level.
Yeah.
And using the words to convey the emotion, and not drama to convey the emotion.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we end up in the finals, because it's just a remarkable rendition of these incredible stories.
Wow. I listened to the audio sample before I interviewed you, and I was like, wait, that's the end of the sample? I mean, it's so well done.
Yeah. So Dennis was great, but that's, I think for us, it was saying, how do you take risk? How do you build a team of people, and how do you do various things that sort of get you one step further for getting the book known?
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the beginning you said that in general you don't consider yourself a person who takes risks. Is that right?
Well, I guess I take risks, but I'm the sort of person who goes to the airport and will check the board for when the flight goes every 20 minutes, right? That's the sort of risk I take, right? So as opposed to the person that's like, oh, whatever. It's like when the plane goes, I'll be sure to be at the gate at the right time. I'm like more of a controlled decision maker, I think, when it comes down to risk. But it's, in Antarctica, they would just be like, well, we'll just drop these 6 guys off, on this coast far from hundreds of miles from base camp, and we'll come back with the ship and pick them up in 6 weeks' time.
Yeah.
And if the ship can't get back to them because it's all iced over, well, they'll figure out something. That's sort of and I'll be like, and no communication to let them know whether the ship can get there or not, other than them sort of be able to say, oh, gee, it's all iced over. We're in deep trouble now. It's like, saying like, wow, that is just like that bravery or risk taking is just unbelievable.
Okay, so this obviously I'm totally engaged in your story right now. So this really amazing story, and these people who are so unlike certainly me and my personality. But then you also have this decision making focus in what you do for work. And now, in the 21st century, it seems like the one thing that we can count on is that things are constantly changing. And so we're always in this new position that I suspect, having not lived my grandmother's life, but I suspect my grandmother lived the first half or 3/4 of her 99 years without having to experience quite so many changes in the world as I did. I mean, I would say for sure the first 40 years of her life couldn't have been as many changes as it seems like I've probably experienced in the last 40 years of mine. So how do we take, I don't even know if it's the right word to say lessons, keys and ideas from other people who somehow managed to make good decisions when it was, I never really thought about it before. I've never really thought about explorers in this way. But if it's constantly, most decisions are going to affect whether you live or die. Like, how can we take that and apply it to our ever-changing kind of like sometimes it's very exciting because we've got new electronic toys to play with. Like I'm definitely one of the girls that if it's between getting diamonds for an anniversary present or a new electronic toy, I want the electronic toy. But on the other hand, there are days when you're just overwhelmed with the amount of change. Like you just figured out how to do something and it's already changed. How can some of the things that you understand about these early people who had none of the techie things that we have now and the 21st century software world that you live in, and how can we apply some of these things to our own lives to live a little bit more peaceful, a little bit more calmly? Is that something that you can help us with?
Yes, I think so. Because actually, when I think about the book, and my vision for the book was never to write a history book. It was actually to write some combination of genres that was using history as a springboard to helping people in modern life make better decisions in their personal lives and in their business lives based on these stories. And so it's looking at history in a different way. It's not looking at history from a point of view of dates and they went 3 miles on that day and 5 miles on that day, and they did this and ate this for dinner or ate that for lunch. It's more trying to say, how do you tell this story, and then say, what do we learn from? What do we learn from Mawson falling into a crevasse and how he gets out of it? And I don't know if I can say specifically how exactly to deal with lots of change in our modern lives, but certainly the explorers were very goal focused. And yet at the same time, what's fascinating is they never achieved any of their goals. These 6 expeditions, not one explorer ever achieved their primary goal.
What?
And yet they all became successful. And it's actually takes business. You said you told me earlier before we started the thing about your studies at the Wharton School. Yeah. And business school teaches you set goals, attain your goals, you'll be successful. So goal attainment, success, or success is goal attainment, and that's really what it's all about. And I'm trying to say to people, it's not. Success is more elusive and more complicated than just goal attainment. And especially when you look at the stories of the early Antarctic explorers, so trying to say, well, what can you learn into modern life with things changing all the time? They had certain things that they did very well. Everyone on the team knew what the goal was. This is what something, and bought into that goal. And the leaders led from the front, which is all quite interesting. They never were in the back like generals going like, "Oh, you guys go off to war." They were literally at the front. Scott, Shackleton, Lawson, Amundsen, all led from the front. And I think something for modern life, I think, especially given the environment we live in right now, in today, with the day we're recording this, the world events happening right now, I think it's about being part of a team. And everything that they did on these expeditions, people felt they were part of a team. They were on a team, with a big team. There's teams of 3 people, teams of 5 people, at different points, they'd break out into these various teams and do things. And we live in our modern lives, maybe all right now in these self-isolating things, but we're part of teams.
Yeah.
And we're part of the team, the Mark Dawson team, or we're part of the team of authors, or I'm part of the team in the Antarctic community, or we're family teams, and to think of ourselves as part of teams, I think helps a lot, even if we're not actually meeting those teams, except through a Zoom mechanism. It's that sense of camaraderie, that we're in it and we're all in it, and we're going to go get through this. And I think that that helps get through change. And they face change. The early explorers faced a lot of change, because you had constantly changing weather. A blizzard could come on very suddenly, trap you in your tent for 5 days. So you talk about self-isolation, all of a sudden that could happen. It's like,
wow.
So they'd be like, okay, now you got 3 guys who, in one tent, or 4 guys in a tent. And,
yeah. Holy cow. Wow. All right. So that's really interesting, because I'm thinking about my husband and I met when we were 19 and 20, and we were married when we were 22, and we're celebrating our 30th wedding anniversary in a little bit more than a month. And we have people asking us all the time, or saying things that is underlying the question, how did you do it? Like, how are you not only still married, like people are married, but a lot of times we'll be someplace and people that we don't know are like, are you guys newlyweds? Or like, no, we just really like each other. But I'm thinking about what you said, like, so our marriage has definitely always been a team. We've always kind of felt that it was him and me against the world. Like we didn't have good role models in our own families. We didn't really know, I'm trying to think if we even knew anyone to look at as a role model when we were newly married. And we had to always be like, okay, this is what the two of us were going to stand together for this and for this. And I'm thinking about what you said about success. And then there's a million things that we didn't achieve, and a million other things that happened where we were like, wow, okay, God, that was unexpected and a major blessing, and other things that were incredibly difficult. And yet I would absolutely classify this 30-year journey as a success, even though there's a ton of things that we still haven't actually achieved. And I'm realizing that can be like, if I'm hearing what you're saying, right? Because I'm thinking, what a great, healthy way to look at your work team. Like, if you weren't almost every job I've been in, my team was all competing against each other, and we were never pulling together. And it was just so frustrating. It's why I always would say I totally disliked working in corporate America in every kind of job that I had, because I always seemed to work in teams where we're competing rather than working together. Is that something that you help businesses with at all?
Well, certainly when I do book talks, and I do talks at business, I spend a lot of time talking about teams, because it's like I was saying, that the Antarctic explorers were really good at teamwork. And one of the things that they did in teams that I think we discovered when we were working on the book was that there was always a second in command on any team, even a team of 3 people. In this first expedition was Scott, Wilson, and Shackleton at that point was a junior member of Scott's expedition in 1903. And they although they didn't have the skills to get to the South Pole on this big scientific expedition with I think they had about 40 men, one of the aims was to say, well, we need to learn how to, if anyone's ever going to get to the South Pole, we need to learn how to sledge across the terrain and pull sledges and work with dogs and other means of moving goods across the terrain. And in that team was Scott, Captain Scott, who was the leader, Edward Wilson, who was a doctor, a painter, a scientist, was the second in command, and Shackleton was a junior member. So you got a 3-man team, and yet you did have a junior member. And I think whenever we looked at Antarctic teams, there always seemed to be either a clearly defined second in command, or everyone knew this was a second in command, even though it wasn't clearly defined. Yeah. And we don't do that in business. And I think that makes when I've seen this done in business, it makes a big difference to people pulling together, because it just gives a different dynamic in the team. And I think, unfortunately, if you didn't have that experience, fortunately, I have had that experience just by dumb luck, being in a part of a team where we did have a second in command, and it worked really well.
Yeah. I'm thinking about my husband's current team right now. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, because I know that my husband goes to this person or he goes to that person. And he knows, which one gets to have the final word or which one can just tell him this is what you should do next without having to ask the person who maybe is the first in command kind of person. Okay, this is really interesting. So then also you were talking about from a marketing perspective, like you and I are both self-published. So I think of the people that I've talked to who are traditionally published, a lot of people just feel really lucky with their team or okay with their team or unlucky with their team, but I never really get the feeling that they feel like there's anything they can do to change or improve their team, like it's kind of already been set for them. But in self-publishing, I'm always thinking about, did this, just as an example, I would get a great cover from a cover designer, but I felt it was just too difficult to work with her. It wasn't easy. And it made me just not really want to work with her, even though the cover was awesome. Whereas there might be somebody else who I love the way that this editor does this. And maybe she doesn't do this, but I love the way she does this. And it makes me be like, no, I definitely want to work with her because I think she brings out the best in me. So I get to kind of constantly be rethinking my team, deciding if I'm going to reform my team. But what I have found is that over, 2011 to 20, wow, 8 years, more than 8 years, that I have been able to create something where maybe similar to you and your book, the money is actually not the thing that I think about when I think about how much I love my job, because I also love working with these people who I never get to see in person except for every few years.
Right.
But it makes me feel really good. Like we're all pulling together and it just makes me happy.
Yes, exactly. I think being parts of the team is it's human nature to be parts of teams. And I think this is one of the things that in the current era that we're living through, feeling that one's part of a team is vital at this stage, and we can learn a lot from the Antarctic explorers. I mean, we never hold them up as perfect decision makers. In fact, they made a lot of bad decisions. They were good at recovering from bad decisions. I think that's maybe the key, and maybe that's the key in your marriage as well. Is that when you hit a bad decision, what do you do? And bad decisions can cause people to fall out very rapidly, as opposed to being a unifying thing of okay, let's what do we do? What do we do? What's our new goal? What's our new approach?
Yeah.
So.
Oh, this is exciting. Okay, so we'll just kind of bring it back around to writing for a minute. So
Sure.
I think that you actually gave us a lot of great tips, but if you have anything in particular that you're thinking, let me just kind of recap the things that I heard you say. Definitely you feel like having an audiobook version, a professional, well-done audiobook version of your book is key in this period of time. You also mentioned that for nonfiction, you and your co-writer David, right?
David, yes.
That you and your co-writer David felt very strongly about getting the table of contents right before you started writing.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
So let's talk about that for just a minute. I don't get a whole lot of nonfiction writers, and I always want to give my audience, a little bit more where they can. But can you give us some tips about how, and feel free to talk about it in terms of you felt this or David felt that, or just like the decisions that you made together. When you have so many things that could be part of a great book, how did you keep on focusing it down so that what you ended up with was truly a great book, knowing that you didn't use a ton of really great information?
This is interesting because literally there are books that are 2 inches thick written about the expeditions. I mean, just to give you an idea, because I have sitting here on my desk.
Oh,
I've got this is Shackleton's book. There are 2 volumes. Actually, there's another volume just as big. 2 volumes written about his expedition to get to the South Pole. And I need to, before we go, I'll have to tell the story about this expedition. But this is like, how do you turn this into about 2 pages or 3 pages of excitement? Put this way.
And
2 or 3
and
of
just
excitement.
for people who are watching only, that's got to be 4 or 5 inches of big, full-size hardcover books. Yeah.
Probably each one's about 3 inches of. I mean, this is literally several thousand pages written. about the expedition, a multi-year expedition in Antarctica. And that's just one of 6 expeditions. And each of the expeditions had massive books written about them. And not just by the core team, but each of the, many of the people who are on the expeditions had their own books written as well. So how do you summarize all that down into to turn something that is into a very exciting story? Yeah. And it's no different than writing fiction. It's fundamentally, you've got to figure out what drives the reader. What are the key things they need to know? And actually, David and I work on this new book now. It's like, we're like, and the new book's part of it's set in Antarctica, but some of it's not in Antarctica. And saying, actually, those names are not important. It's not important who the men are. It's important like what the story is, but it's not necessarily important all the detail. Because if you're trying to tell a story really fast and try to get it really exciting, you can leave out a lot of detail. If you get people interested, they'll go to the internet, they'll get other books about it and read. But I think it's getting a story that is pared down to a stage where it is literally thrilling sentence by sentence by sentence. And that's really what we aim to do.
Yeah. All right. So that's a great tip that I don't think that I have thought through before. And in fact, one of the things that I look at when I look at some of the nonfiction that I've written, I have one online class that's in text is about 280 pages, a single space text. It's quite detailed because I want to make sure that if you're looking for detail, you're finding it. But sometimes I'm reading it and thinking, too much detail. So I've actually thought, well, all right, because I do want it to be available to people if they do want it, I actually started doing it a little bit more, maybe a little bit more like journalism, where I'm hitting the high points in almost bullet point fashion in the beginning, so that if you're like, that's all I needed, you can just move on. But then giving more detail, almost sort of starting again, but now adding in all the other things that you might actually still be looking for. I don't know if this is similar to what you're talking about.
Yes, yeah, I think it is. It's trying to figure out what fits into the book, what's critical to the storyline, what's key to keep in the book. And I think that was again focusing on the table of contents. So I think most of the table of our table of contents sort of like a statement and a question. It's like, okay, or trying to look at I can't remember all the great things. I mean, a lot of this was David's idea on what we're doing on the table of contents, and so the chapter about moss and falling into the crevasse was called "How Strong Is Your Will to Survive? Where Does Inspiration Come From?" So this concept of using questions as sort of leading points to get people into the chapter, get people. And it also helped us to be like, okay, where are we going with that chapter? And using spreadsheets, again, to sort of keep track. Okay, so this is the main story. This is the main key lesson that comes out of it, or the main decision point, or the main, this is the action theme of that story. And then how do you lay them all out? And almost like laying it out on there's one point where with a book designer and I laid all the photographs out on a table and said, is this the right order for the chapters? Because at the start of each chapter, there's so many wonderful Antarctic photographs. If I can hold one up, there's, this is a picture of a ship in the ice. So if you're just listening to the podcast on audio, it's just a remarkable nighttime photograph of Shackleton's ship trapped in the ice, but done with all this wonderful lighting, and it's just very atmospheric photograph. But it's like, do you put that photo in, or do you put a photo of men, or do you put photos of dogs, which are always nice to have, the sledge dogs, or the ponies, or and we thought, well, actually, at the start of each chapter, we'll take one photograph, and then our book designer would stylize it. This was actually her idea, to stylize the photograph so it's not recognizable to someone who's an Antarctic expert. They'd be like, I know what that's photos of, but it's not really it's not the classical rendition of that photo. And for everybody else, it's like, if we excite them about the story, and they can just Google and find the photographs. There are tons of photographs from the early expeditions, which is wonderful. So it was trying to get that balance of what do we put in the book and what don't we put in the book, and how do you keep the book tight and concise and flowing and literally exciting.
Yeah. So your book designer was another person on your team who helped with
Yes,
that.
that's right. That's right.
Wow.
So one of the things was because you and I talked about this before we started the broadcast was another technique that we used was and this is where you talk about having a team and you're all working together. I was fighting with my editors. I was determined that the book would have a tone and a flow that would be slightly unconventional. And David had certain turns of phrases that I wanted to keep in. The editor kept trying to like take them out. It's like we're talking about the science and saying he had this phrase of like adding to the pyramid of knowledge or adding to the pyramid of scientific knowledge or something like that. And our editor was saying, no, that wouldn't be a pyramid. You wouldn't think of it as a pyramid because pyramids are like have a top and they're like, are adding to the base or adding to the top. And she's like, that's not a good, and we're like, no, it makes sense, right? It just flowed nicely when you're reading it. It's like we just determined and just fought to keep our vision. And one of our visions was to have something at the end of each chapter to get the reader to the next chapter. So it's not a story from one to another, because in a way, it's like once Mawson falls into the crevasse, and I'm not going to spoil it whether he gets out or not, the next chapter isn't about what happens next to Mawson. It's a completely different storyline.
Yeah.
And it's a completely different decision style. And because but how do you get the reader to go, okay, God, that was exciting. Okay, now we got a cup of coffee. I'm trying to like every time we're like, well, how do you then get them to, they're not gonna get a cup of coffee, they're gonna grab them to the point of saying, I gotta get to the next chapter.
Yeah.
And our editor kept saying, no, you gotta take that. Every editor, we had 3 editors that worked at the structural editor and a copy, and then a copy editor. And at the end, David and I finished the whole thing, and I gave it to some people, and I just the feedback I just thought this isn't good enough yet. And we went completely back to the drawing board and said, got a whole new editor who knew nothing about Antarctica, nothing about the stories, and said, rewrite it. And well, not rewrite it for us, but just edit it. And I accepted maybe 50% of her changes. I didn't accept all the changes, but again, she was also saying, don't put this stuff at the end. But to me, it was like how the hook to get you from one to the other is from one chapter to another was that. And my role model, also like talk about role models and inspiration, was Collins and LaPierre. So I don't know if you know these names. They wrote Is Paris Burning? They wrote Oh Jerusalem. I think they were both journalists, and they wrote books about these big historical events. So Oh Jerusalem is the leaving of Palestine by the British in 1948, the formation of Israel. Oh Jerusalem, Is Paris Burning was Hitler going to burn down the bridges of Paris. All the bridges were wired with explosives when the Germans were leaving, the Nazis were leaving Paris, and he kept calling his main guy in Paris saying, is Paris burning? Have you blown up all the bridges? Because he didn't want to destroy the city. He wanted to destroy the city upon leaving. And as this guy was so enamored with Paris, he just couldn't do it. And this incredible books about these historical events. And they wrote a book called Freedom at Midnight, which is the partitioning of India and Pakistan. I mean, just wonderful, thick, detailed books about these incredible historical events. But every chapter at the end drove you to the next chapter. And I thought that is, if I ever wrote a book, that's what I want to do. It's like they were just so good at going, like, you just couldn't, I mean, literally, if you start any of those 3 books I named, and they have a few others, you cannot stop reading. And they're like 300 pages. They're like this. So I thought that I've got to stick to, even if people on the team are saying, don't do this, don't do that, it's like, I stick to it. But David and I we disagreed on one polar event specifically, and we wrote both of our viewpoints into the book, but we never really disagreed on anything. And most of it with the editors never disagreed, and never disagree with Dennis on anything. So I was like, but I think it is having your vision, and you probably the same. You have your vision, and it's like, you got to stay to your vision.
Yeah. Wow. This is so interesting.
So,
I can't say that I ever thought that I would find your topic interesting, but the way that you present it, I'm like, okay, now I'm totally,
uh,
I'm in.
oh wow, oh great, yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it's literally um, just well, the Antarctic stories are really exciting. I just want to tell one story, just give listeners just a little bit of insight into an Antarctic story and what you can learn from it for modern day decision making.
Yeah, right.
So Shackleton, so after, as I said, he went out with Scott and Wilson on this first expedition. Shackleton actually gets scurvy on the way back and almost dies on the way back and gets sent back to England. And so he's like in disgrace. He's basically, he almost died. He was a junior member of the team. They actually didn't reach the mileage they had wanted to get to. They didn't reach the distance they wanted to get to. And he's sent back. Rather than hanging his head in shame and basically drifting off into whatever else he was going to do with his life, he goes back to Britain and starts talking about how great the expedition was and how great Scott was and how great everything was, and pitching it as, this great adventure. And then he starts setting up his own expedition. So he spends 2 years raising money, setting up his own expedition. And his goal was like, I'm going to take men down. We're going to do the science. We're going to do all this stuff, but we're also going to head to the South Pole. And we're going to get to the South Pole, take a team of 4 men, and we'll have, they'll use ponies and because that was sort of a way of rather than dogs, but they were going, but they get to a stage, and to make a very long story short, basically they get to a stage where they're 103 miles from the South Pole and they're running out of food, and they know they're going to run out of food on the way back, and they have to make a decision. And the decision is, what do you do? Do you go forward to get to the South Pole? So this is, in the scheme of the world back in the early 1900s, there were the big prizes that would put your name in the record books forever. It's first to the South Pole, first to the North Pole, and first to the top of Everest. Well, the North Pole is sort of already being fought for by Cook and Perry and other adventurers. There was no one's getting to the top of Everest. No one had the climbing skills or the equipment to get to the top of Everest. So South Pole was like one of the 3 big prizes. And here he is, he's literally 103 miles from the South Pole. One of the biggest prizes. This is the King of England, the relative of England. So the newspapers are following this. This is big news, and he knows they're running out of food. Do you continue forward or do you turn back? So it seems like a binary decision, doesn't it? It seems like, do you go forward and risk and hope that you can sort of eke out your supplies to get back, or do you just say, okay, we're just, for safety's sake, we've got to turn around. And I think this is something that's so instrumental for modern living, which is Shackleton sees a third way, a third alternative. And so often we sit in life, we see, I've only got 2 choices. And Shackleton's like, we're going to leave the tent and sleeping bags, everything behind. We're going to walk south as far as we can for one day, plant the British flag, and then we're going to turn around and walk back to our supplies. And then we're going to camp overnight, and then we'll start the 700-mile journey back to base camp. So the question to your audience is why? Why would they do that? And you think that's crazy. Why would they do that? And if the reason is because you want to cross the 100-mile mark, to be able to say, we're not going to achieve our goal, but we're going to achieve something.
Yeah.
And when we go back to England, at least then we can say, hey, we got within 100 miles of the South Pole. And it's such a valuable lesson for modern day living that we face all sorts of adversity, all sorts of challenges. We can miss our goals. You can say, oh, I want to, achieve writing a book and get it launched by the end of 2020. And you realize, actually, I'm only going to get 35% there. But hey, 75%, maybe you got 73%, but you say, hey, I'm going to set milestone, at least I'll get 75% and plant my flag. It's like, then you feel like you've got something. And I think that lesson is so valuable.
Yeah.
And just to wrap up the story, Shackleton writes to his wife, he says, I thought you'd rather have a live donkey than a dead lion.
Indeed. Yeah, because then I don't know what happened to him, but like in my story creating mind, I'm like, because if you say, but I got within 100 miles of it and I live to have another goal and more things that I can do, Like whether it's life and death scenario, like with him, or other scenarios like with us where, okay, well, it turns out that I wasn't able to achieve this goal, but because I decided to not to let myself think that there was only a binary choice, I thought of another thing that I wouldn't have done that turned out to be a good choice also.
Well, exactly. I mean, I had visions of being like, oh, we'll sell 50,000 copies of the book. It's like, and then I end up in Hollywood at this event with Sigourney Weaver. I'm like, who cares about selling 50,000 copies of the book? I was like, this is a, this may be very different from the goal I set out when, David and I finished the book, and I'm like, oh yeah, we could be able to sell 50,000 in a year. Like, of course we never did. But but all of a sudden there was something new that happened. And I think this is where, again, choosing to see what's victory and what's, okay, so we didn't achieve one goal, but we achieved something completely different, but it's sort of exciting in the fact that we achieved that. So,
yeah.
So it's sort of taking benefits from various things.
Brad, I love that. And always that I knew that there was going to be too much interesting stuff that I was going to have to stop our conversation, but that's such a great place to stop with this idea that no matter what's going on in our lives, in our work life, in our writing life, in our personal life, to remember that there are more choices than we think we see.
Yes, exactly.
I love it. I love giving people some encouragement and giving them like something new to think about that maybe they haven't been thinking about for a while.
Yes, absolutely. And that's really the goal of the book. The goal of the book is not to be prescriptive and say, these are the lessons that are from these stories. It's actually to get people to think about it. One of my inspirations was Malcolm Gladwell. I don't know if you've ever read.
Oh, I love Malcolm Gladwell.
It's trying to be in that style of book. They're to be like get people to think about life and challenges and risk and danger and exploration and science and all this stuff, and think about this as ways to learn. For how do I interpret some of this for my own life and my own style?
Yeah.
What can I take away from these incredible stories of people trekking across frozen tundra to achieve things? Like, okay, I want to look. You read some of the stories in the book and you think it's absolutely completely nuts. Like they went off and they had this vision to, there was this old scientific Victorian theory about penguin eggs that did actually be, if you took a penguin egg in its early formation, it would actually be like part reptilian dinosaur.
Wow.
The only trouble is penguins lay their eggs in the middle of an Antarctic winter.
Yeah.
So how do you, pitch dark, you only would have the moonlight and then only if it wasn't cloudy. And it's also cold, the coldest time of year. And the only way to get these penguin eggs, and these three men set out with the desire, which is only to get penguin eggs. And they bring the penguin eggs, and of course, as you would expect, the theory's wrong. The theory, and so they risk life and limb and experience temperatures of negative 77 degrees, and literally very nearly die, and over and over and over again, and just like, this is just such a remarkable story. Like, and it at another level is so incredibly inspiring to think about people doing these sorts of things, and I think that's what makes this Antarctic history come alive, hopefully, for people, and they're thinking about adversity and risk and danger in our modern lives, and which we have a lot of adversity, risk, and danger in our modern lives right now. So,
yeah. Wow. Okay. You know what? When we finish talking, I'm going to go back and be thinking about my fiction storytelling in hopefully some broader, deeper ways. This is really cool to think about.
Okay, great.
All right, Brad, we need to know, where can people find you, your current book, audiobook, and then information when your new book comes out?
Oh, great. Sure. Happy to talk about that. So our book, called When Your Life Depends on It, Extreme Decision-Making Lessons from the Antarctic, is on Amazon. We also publish it through Ingram Spark. It's on Kindle and Kindle Unlimited. Actually, it's available right now if people are on Amazon Prime. It's for the very limited period of time. It's still in the Amazon Prime if you're in the US. It's the audiobooks on iTunes and Audible and Amazon, and the website. So if you want to learn more about the book, more about me and David Hirzel, it's www.extremedecisions.com. That's extreme-decisions.com. So there's a dash between the words extreme and decisions. And we'd love to hear from people. And if you want to contact me directly, it's brad.borkan, Borkan, @author@gmail.com. But there are links on the website. You can contact us through that.
Good.
And always happy to chat and talk about things. And
excellent.
So
and then when you start announcing the new book, that'll be announced on the website. Do you have an email list?
No, we actually don't. And this was something I really need to do. But in amongst all these things, I go to Mark Dawson, listen to these lectures by Joanna Penn. The first thing you need is a mailing list. It's like, I was like, no, the first thing I need is an audiobook. It's like, the next thing I need is this. The next thing I need is, and so in a way, it's like I keep thinking I need a mailing list. But for Dave and I, we've got stories to tell, and we tell stories in a way that no one else tells them. And I think this new book will be exciting. I can't reveal the name of it because the name gives away a part of the story. But I think what we did is we said, what interests us? And we said, well, actually there are tons of stuff that interests us. And, first the North Pole, first the South Pole, first up Everest, first moon landing, first, and it wasn't all first. It's like laying the transatlantic cable and all sorts of different things that happen around the world and that influenced our modern life. And we basically said, let's just grab a bunch of those, like maybe 10 or 11, 9, 10, 11 of those. So I started making lists of spreadsheets and lists of all these different exciting things that happen in the world. And not far history, not like the invention of fire or the wheel or something like that, and not new stuff like the internet or iPhone or things like that have been written about a lot, but saying like in this period of history, which is sort of around the time of the explorers. And so let's just pick a bunch of these things and write about them.
Yeah.
And we started making these spreadsheets, and all of a sudden we discovered a pattern, and there's a pattern to them.
Oh.
And we're writing about the pattern. And I don't think anyone has ever seen this pattern before or discovered it. And we just feel like we're like on. And it's not just about these events, but it's actually the people behind them, and then focusing on decision making and what we can learn from modern day decision making. And I think it's definitely a big book. Hopefully, we'll sell more than a few thousand copies, but hopefully it will change the way people look at problems, even the problems we face in society, in the world today. Like how when you look at a problem, you're like, okay, that's let's look at it from these different angles, and the way a lot of big things happen in the world is like people looking at problems from multiple different angles. So it's exciting. But it's trying to also, David and I work full time, so it's trying to juggle all that and have a life and. So.
All right. So extreme-decisions.com.
Right.
Yeah. And there's a lot of information there. I went there today and I was like, oh my gosh, I can't even like read and watch all this. You have different interviews and stuff there too. So
yeah, I've been on a few interviews and some of the TV shows. And then there's also some photographs. I was in Antarctica. I spent November in Antarctica. So there's some of my photographs from there.
Oh, gosh. Wow. No, November in Antarctica is the beginning of summer.
It's the beginning of spring.
It's
just the end. It was the first ship sailing out of Argentina to get to Antarctica.
Oh, wow.
Springtime. So it's like, it spent a month, 3,745 nautical miles. So quite exciting.
Oh my gosh. Wow. Okay. Yes. I have to go read or listen to this book. I think you've got me hooked on the audiobook because I also listened to the sample and I was like, but what's going to happen next?
Well, Dennis has such a wonderful voice. He's just I also just a remarkable human being. And
nice. Well, Brad, thank you so much for being on the show. And I'm telling you, you need to tell me when the next book comes out because I want you to come back and talk to us
I'd
about
love to.
that.
That'd be wonderful. I'd certainly love to come back. Well, as soon as we can announce the book, I'd love to come back and talk about it because I think it is an exceedingly exciting topic.
Sweet. Oh, I'm excited already. Just thinking about patterns and I'm an Excel girl. So as soon as you said Excel spreadsheet, everything mapped out, I'm like, oh, that sounds lovely.
So, well,
I'm weird, so it's okay.
No, that sounds good.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. This was really fun.
Oh, great. Yeah, thanks. It's been lovely. Great fun to chat with you. And if you had mentioned it before, just to leave your audience with one point, if I was just to make one final point, is one of the themes that comes out through all the Antarctic stories is that the explorers we use a phrase, never ever give up trying. that no matter what happened to them, falling in crevasse, whatever, they never stopped trying to succeed. And literally, like, even though Shackleton didn't get to the South Pole, you could say, well, yeah, that doesn't quite apply. He actually turned around and went back. They literally got down to the very last biscuits. All they had for breakfast was biscuits, and each one had one, and that was the end of their food, all their food, until they could get to the next depot of supplies. And they never stopped trying to succeed. And I think there's just as authors, there's so many times you think, I just can't do this. It's just, I'm not, the story's not coming together. So, just keep trying.